Well, you started. So you really are.
Right?
Yeah. Although I say it's stressed, it did. It's so
I wish.
Yeah. You need me to down for the senior.
Okay, good afternoon. We'll get started. We do have a quorum and we have a lot to get through today. So it is, what is today? I don't even know what today is. November 18th. November 18th, calling our student attendance legislative study group to order. We'll start because we do have a new member that has joined us, just to do introductions and let us know a little bit about yourself, your district, and how you're engaged with education.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Michael Kroon. I represent Senate District 32, which is Blaine, Ham Lake, Lexington, and Columbus. Serve on the Education Finance Committee in the Senate. And prior to being in the Senate, I was on the Spring Lake Park School Board for 5 years. And that is Northern Fridley, Spring Lake Park, and about a third of Blaine is that school district. So looking forward to catching up and seeing what work you guys have done already up to this point.
The one thing I love about this group is we all have so many connections to the school system before like actually serving in this capacity. So it's nice to bring those layers. Nick, would you mind taking roll call for us for quorum purposes?
Representative Keeler,
Present?
Representative Bakeberg, Representative Lawrence, Representative Vernick,
Present.
Senator Kunesh,
Here.
Senator Swazinski,
Here.
Senator Farnsworth,
Here.
Senator Kroon.
Thank you. I think Representative Bakeberg will be jumping on if you could just watch for him for attendance purposes. Can we make a motion to move the minutes of the prior meeting?
So moved.
Representative Lawrence moves the minutes of the last meeting. Any seconds?
Second.
Vernick seconds. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. We're good to go on that. We are going to have, so what we've done is we've taken all of the conversations that we've had, we've come together, we talked about our buckets, and then we've gone pretty deep into some preliminary recommendations. Those were sent out. The hope is that people have been able to look at each of the buckets that we started or the areas of work that we kind of want to maybe approach. Keeping in mind the whole basis of this conversation when we started was to come up with some work that we could do into the legislative session that was both bipartisan and both House and Senate ideas come together. And so I think we did a really good job at taking what is a very, very, very large issue area. We all know that attendance is something that we really want to address. We've broken it down so much that we know that there is like much more that we have to do. So this is just very, very starting spots. it was kind of figuring out which dominoes do we pull and then like the trickle effect of it. So happy to have input today. We're going to have Nick go over the recommendations, and then we have many of you signed up to give us some feedback and some implementation steps that maybe we need to take into consideration. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Nick.
Good afternoon, members, Madam Chair. I'll just go through a high-level overview of these recommendations, and then the following two meetings, members will also have an opportunity to discuss. So the first bucket, as we've been calling them, was about consistent definitions. And the first part of that conclusion was perhaps working with the School Board Association to adopt model definitions. At our next meeting, we are hoping to have a presentation by the pilot program being led by Minneapolis Public Schools, and hope to have some sort of statewide consistent definitions around terms like unexcused absence, excused absence, half-day absence, tardy, things like that. And then the other recommendation is about examining how terms like habitual truancy or educational neglect are used in practice compared to how they are written in state statute. Those are all, the statutes are listed for members' reference. There are other ideas along there. The second bucket is about coordinating between state and local agencies. Working with staff, we outlined a couple opportunities for that, such as the Children's Cabinet or the Minnesota Youth Council. The third bucket was about community engagement. The commission had talked a lot about cultural lived experience school credits. So one of the ideas was to work with the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council and the Tribal Nations Education Committee about where state law could be adjusted. Specifically, we listed the statute where excused absences are listed, and the legislature could work with tribal governments there to perhaps add additional culturally relevant needs to that list. I also listed an example of Indiana state law that has a procedure for non-classroom activity and a way for students to still get class credit. The fourth bucket was based on recommending that MDE provide more public data about student attendance, specifically a breakdown of different severity levels of missed absences, and also by school level. The fifth bucket was about increasing data sharing between school districts and county governments. Staff worked with, I believe, Hennepin County Attorney's Office or Minneapolis Public Schools, and figured out which part of statutes potentially are causing issues, and the legislature could investigate, or the study group could recommend changes to that statute that is in Chapter 13. The sixth bucket is about providing school staff that are dedicated specifically to reducing truancy. This would obviously be more financial in nature. So we listed possible areas where the study group could recommend funding, or could change the statutes regarding restrictions on funding to provide for individuals who are focused specifically on reducing truancy. The seventh bucket was about transportation. Staff and I put a little thing about type 3 transportation, which school districts can have a passenger vehicle such as a van. And we outlined statutes that the legislature of the study group could investigate or alter around the process for type 3 vehicles or encouraging districts to have type 3 vehicles. We also listed possibilities for the legislature to examine things like a rideshare app or a taxi app and allowing those to fall under type 3 categories, or providing funding for more type 3 vehicles. And lastly, the study group could investigate the school bus radius law in section 123B.88, which is the 2-mile radius for providing busing. And the last bucket, number 8, was community support. And that was about encouraging the legislature and agencies to create a more holistic success or evaluation system for the various programs we've heard school districts are currently operating with. And then once there's a system of measuring which school districts have found a successful program, the legislature could help prop those or fund those. And we also listed different areas of law, such as full service community schools, school-based healthcare, health centers, community education programs, or the statutes that cover school nurses, or sections of the law that the study group has discussed potential changes to. And I'm happy to answer any questions today. I know there's staff here as well who can really get into the weeds on all of this.
Any members needing to get into the weeds yet? No, okay, so I think what we'll do, so for everybody to have significant amount of time that signed up to testify, we're gonna have to have like a 10-minute max. And that's including our conversations and questions with them so that everybody has enough time. They're gonna give us their recommendations, implementation strategies, any things that we maybe need to take into consideration before our final piece. I just wanna respect everybody's time. It seems like when we get to the end of the list, then they're cut really short. And so if everybody can be respectful of the 10-minute window, I know that that's hard to ask, but we have a lot to get through. Happy to have conversations after too, but just to be mindful of our time so that we can get out on time. That would be great. I do know one thing we're working on, kind of on a side note from all of this, was almost like a guide of all the statutes, because there's so many statutes that have come up in this. Some of them are in the education lane, some of them are in child welfare, some of them are in health, some of them are in public safety. So we're also kind of side by side working on like a small kind of breakdown of where all these sections in statute are, so that as we're addressing them, we kind of know what they connect to as well, because unintended consequences are not the plan here. So that will be kind of a cheat sheet for all of us as we move into the next session to help us with this work. So I also want to pause to say thank you to staff. I know that we put a lot on you guys to like figure out all the gray area of the things that we talk about. And I think you've done a fantastic job. Your work does not go unnoticed, and we're very grateful for you. So thank you, staff, for that. Okay, we'll start. We have Michelle Bryant is up first, and then Matt Shaver will be next. Michelle, if you want to head up to they're on Zoom. Is Michelle on Zoom?
On Zoom, I'm here.
Okay, we can hear you okay, and then Matt, you'll be next if you're ready. Okay, go ahead, Michelle, if you want to start with your name, your organization, and then you can start letting us know your feedback.
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My name is Michelle Bryant. I work as a school social worker for St. Louis Park Schools. I'm in a K-5 building, and I have over 20 years of experience in working in education. Part of my current role is to monitor attendance, provide interventions, education, and ultimately refer families for truancy. I've read through your minutes. Your conversations are much more robust, so forgive me if some of my asks are redundant. But one thing that I was wondering is if you guys could look at the open enrollment statute, if we could redefine that or update it. Right now, it reads that you have to be referred for juvenile court or habitually truant in order for a district to be able to disenroll you. My ask would be that it would be more broad, that late start or late pickups, tardies, and or absences would be included in that it would be at the discretion of the school district. Could the legislature define McKinney-Veto's undefined permanent housing so that it reads, if a student has lived at the same address for a year or more, or 2 years or more, that constitutes permanent housing? Right now, there's no definition as far as a timeline is concerned. I would ask of you all that any additional funding that require additional teaching staff or any monies that go to allocating or directed for attendance, that it's earmarked for the intended purpose solely to address those things. I'll speak hypothetically and in general terms. I find that oftentimes if money is not earmarked, it goes to district admin and assistance at the district office. So I would greatly appreciate any money that's allocated for those initiatives that it's spoken for the schools and the direct services we want to provide. Is there any way the legislature could provide public service announcements or some type of an educational campaign about school attendance being a law? That kindergarten is not what it used to be, that every year builds on the previous one. So it's important that your child is here every day and on time. And I'm cutting off my speech because I know it's time limited and I want to be respectful of everyone else that's on the docket.
Thank you. I was just looking, I know that Representative Vernig had brought up that PR piece of like doing just outreach on like what is the requirements or what is the expectation of school. But we'll make notes on that. Thank you. That's all great feedback. I know that when we've talked about the actual position, we've talked about that needs navigator, liaison role. I think the intention would be very clear that that would be money that's funded towards addressing attendance. But you're right. Once we get into actual legislation for it, those are the types of things that we'll be sure to like dig into. Matt Shaver, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Keeler and members of the Student Attendance and Truancy Legislative Study Group. I'm Matt Shaver, the Policy Director at SATLSG. We're education advocates focused on students. Thank you for the opportunity to share our feedback on your preliminary recommendations. So we're broadly supportive of the approach the study group has taken with the recommendations and think the multi-pronged approach with the various categories makes a ton of sense in dealing with as complex of an issue as student attendance. Our main piece of feedback across these categories is to encourage the task force to move beyond encouragement to expecting action of school districts and the state. So does anybody know which elementary school in Minnesota had the highest attendance rate last week? Or the middle school with the best attendance growth week over week in November? How about for last year? In Rhode Island, the governor, using real-time data provided by the schools to his state Department of Education, puts out a weekly press release of recognition for schools and communities that are doing exemplary work on attendance. Last week, Coleman Elementary School in Woonsocket improved their weekly attendance rate by 5%, the best in the state. So shout out to them. I'm not saying that we're a weekly press release away from the governor from fixing an attendance crisis, but just want you to think about what has to be true about the systems, the real-time data that is working in Rhode Island to be able to produce something like that, and the importance it places on attendance in that state. That level of coordination and leadership is a model that we should be copying here. If nothing changes, I'll be able to tell you the elementary school with the highest consistent attendance numbers for fall 2024 in September of 2026. That's unacceptable. And we hope to see action and investment at the legislature this spring to address chronic absenteeism, investments in policy that will be implemented in the fall of 2025. And if nothing changes about the timeliness of our data, we'll see how those investments and policy changes impact attendance data in September of 2027. That kind of data lag, when every single day, tens of thousands of teachers in this state take attendance, where we count every single kid who is or is not in school, having to wait 2 years before we know as before you know as decision makers and we know as the public how we're doing with attendance, that's unacceptable. And we can do better. It is possible. We see it in other states. Rhode Island is just one example. And so we encourage the study group to look again at sections 1 and 4 and add requirements and urgency to those recommendations around the timeliness of data reporting. I'll wrap up here just by thanking this task force for the way it's conducted itself. The work on attendance has been bipartisan from the start. And as we look forward to this unique session ahead of us, I hope that leadership has been paying attention to the way that the chairs on this committee and its members have operated. The work that's been done here is a model for how things should go this winter and spring when the rest of your colleagues return to the Capitol. And I want to thank you all for the work that you've done so far, and we look forward to continued partnership in any way that we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? No, thanks for looking into the Rhode Island stuff. It's a really interesting state to look at. Did you have a question, Senator Swazinski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does the Rhode Island, when they come out with the weekly best school report, do they say what they did to improve attendance? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Matt.
Thank you so much for the question, Chair Swazinski. I'm just looking at the press release from last Wednesday, November 13th. And it is just data reporting and then an opportunity to highlight and recognize where those schools are doing their work. And again, I think a press release isn't going to be the key here, but it wouldn't hurt, right? And being able to get that real-time data, I think, provides that emphasis on how important attendance is, right? Like, I think whatever you want school to be for your kids and the members of this committee want, like, you probably all have different answers of what the point of school is, but whatever you want it to be can't happen unless we're getting kids there. And I think that leadership from the top level, making sure our systems are talking to each other and we're understanding how we're doing with this just fundamental measure of, are we getting kids in the door or not, period, is so critical to actually make that be the case. Because if they're not there, then school can't be what you want it to be for them.
Senator Swazinski, did you have anything else? Anybody else? Anybody online? I'd share that there. Okay. Thank you. We're gonna move, actually, is the Pacer Coalition online? I know that they are doing a Zoom presentation and they need to jump off. Are they able to go quick? Claire and Kathy? And then we'll move to Minnesota Youth Council after that.
I'm unmuted. Okay. I'm Claire Eckley and I've taught for quite a number of years. I started out in Seattle and then went to San Francisco area and then moved back here after I had retired back home. And when the last thing I did when I was working in California was I started a school for students who were failing and were having problems with attendance. And all of a sudden we didn't have problems with attendance and the students started learning. And what we found out was that every one of them had learning disability that had never been addressed. And when these disabilities were starting to be addressed, they felt much more comfortable in school. Then I was, and Matt also, I'm going to just interject here. Matt reminded me of a parent who called me one day because they had moved back east, and when the student had enrolled, the mother was given a phone call a few days after she'd started school, and school had started, and she was asked if there was anything more that the school district could offer her child. And she was so shocked. She'd never had anyone call and ask her that before. So Matt's on the right road. Anyway, most of our students made in the school that I started, they made 2 years to 6 years to 8 years growth, sometimes only in one school year. Sometimes it took a little longer, but they made tremendous growth. And but they also learned to be respectful of one another. There was no one bullying them. There was no one giving them a hard time. No one saying that they couldn't do anything. And it worked quite well. And I worked with a variety of other agencies within the county. Then the other day, and the main reason I want to be here is because the other day I was at a IEP meeting for a student and who has a difficulty with attendance and with school, and was last year at an alternative school. And it came to mind that she probably has a disability that should have been addressed beginning when she first started school, and no one recognized that. And the parents didn't know. And today she's now in high school and they don't know what to ask. They don't know who to talk to. So they just accidentally happened to find me through the grandmother, through a friend, through referral. And I'm very concerned about this child, and I'm hoping that we will have another meeting so that we can see that all of these issues, and many came to mind during our meeting, and that we can start helping her to feel comfortable in school, because feeling comfortable in school can keep you away from the school and make you not want to be there. If students are bullying you because you're not learning and you don't know how to do something, or if they're giving you a hard time, or they start thinking terrible things. And that was something when I was teaching in public school, I made sure that every student in the class learned how to help anyone else in the class, and they all felt very comfortable doing that. And it always surprised me when they would walk up to somebody and they'd say, well, do you need any help today? And here they were, elementary students, and it just blew my mind. I couldn't believe that they would, because they were being asked to do this, that they actually followed through and did it, especially if they understood or if they got through early. So I am very concerned about what's happening. I want to follow this process and somehow or other be involved in it and see that we can find something good for the students here in Minnesota. Thank you. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Are you both adding any input or just one of you?
Should I say something? I would just add that I'm the grandmother, and I found Claire to be hopefully an advocate that can help my granddaughter get on back on track, because the year that she spent in alternative school, I don't feel like she learned anything. Truancy was acceptable, it seemed to me. I just feel like she's falling through the cracks and missing out on a lot. And now she's back in a high school where she's not doing very well and she's starting to skip school again. I know that, Claire can help her with some tutoring and hopefully she can graduate, but we don't know what her test scores are. We don't know if I think she needs an IEP. So we're working to help her, but I'm also concerned that there's so many more students like her that they're just falling through the cracks and there's no support for them.
Thank you. I guess, have a question about the PACER Coalition in general. I'm gathering you guys are a community support group, right? You're not, or are you funded and supported within the school district as a partnership in
No,
support?
the coalition was started by Paula Goldberg and by the Goldbergs at PACER, and it pulled in a variety of different people from different agencies. And I had helped start a similar organization in California, and so Paula Goldberg made sure that I continued to be a part of this, and especially when I was president of the Upper Midwest branch of the International Dyslexia Association. And I have continued to be a member of this coalition and assist in our discussions and the decisions where we want to go and what would work and what suggestions need to come. So I've done this for 15, 20 years.
I think that's really great. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying some of that. I know that special education 504 plans, that's been something that's been brought up quite a bit, as there's always that other level of need within the education system. And I know that IEPs 504 special education is always a conversation when we're in session. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all engage with us in that way too. That's helpful feedback. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Moving over to Priscilla with the Minnesota Youth Council, and then we'll move to Hennepin County after that, Ashley. Hi, have a seat. If you want to introduce yourself and let us know who you're with for the record, and then you can start.
Thank you. I'm gonna adjust my seat just a little bit. Sweet. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chair Keeler, members of the Student Attendance and Truancy Legislative Study Group. For the record, my name is Priscilla Mayoa, and I'm the Director of the Minnesota Youth Council, which is housed under the Minnesota Alliance with Youth. And the Minnesota Youth Council is an advisory board of young people across the state representing Minnesota youth. First of all, I want to say thank you all for your hard work and dedication in addressing chronic absenteeism in schools. I also commend you for recognizing the need to have the voices of the people most impacted by this issue, youth. I know that you guys had a meeting where you had young people coming and testifying. We really appreciate that initiative. It is so important to include the perspective of students when we're addressing issues that impact them. I would say a democracy and government is strong and sound when young people are able to participate in it as well. It is also why we feel so honored as the Youth Council to be included in the preliminary report that was put out. We know that to solve the issue of chronic absenteeism in Minnesota, it requires all hands on deck. And we're really excited to be one of those hands representing the needs of young people across the state. We recognize the state agencies and local governments as really strong partners. We partner with them on other issues currently, and we're really looking forward to continuing to partner with them in this work and working collaboratively with them. Sorry, I can't talk today. With them on this issue of chronic absenteeism. And I'm just gonna end echoing the words of Representative Sensamura during this past session in which he invoked the grade Jackson 5. We at the Minnesota Youth Council, we want our students back in school as well. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your hard work. And we look forward to working on this issue. Thank you.
Hang tight. I want to ask you a couple questions first. Thank you, though. Do any other members have any questions first? Okay. That was my pause. Did you like him practicing my pause? Yeah, okay. So when you say that you would like the Minnesota Youth Council to be more involved, we do have in number 2, section B, we do have that we would engage the Minnesota Youth Council. What capacity do you have? I feel like youth are impacted in many of the things we do, far more than just education, like in all the other tables that we sit at. And the youth voice is so important, but also we don't want to add more, right, to their responsibility to always give us the feedback. So from your honest opinion, what is the capacity that they could participate in this? Because we don't want to add more to their young plates already. They're all, add more overwhelmingness to them, but also really giving them the opportunity to have input. We did that here, and I would like to do that as we move forward. But again, honest opinion, what do you think their capacity and interest level is to engage on a deep level in this?
Yeah, their interest level is off the roof. Every time I brought an opportunity to the youth council members to say, hey, we have a meeting with MDH or MDE and they would like to get your perspective, they're always ready and involved. In terms of capacity though, we want to be mindful of students' time. Usually around this time, I mean, some of them are probably coming back from school now, but oftentimes a lot of these meetings are during the school time. And when we're addressing chronic absenteeism and we're asking students to miss school, to be a part of things, it kind of defeats the purpose. So it's also like making time for them and having conversations with them after 4 o'clock on the weekends. We meet as youth council on Sunday. That's when adults want to rest, myself included. But knowing that youth voice is really, really important is accommodating for those things. So they do have the capacity and the interest. It's about meeting them where they're at.
That's wonderful. I agree. I mean, I was a liaison, worked with kids for a long time. One of the things that we've started doing back in my community, because I also have a geographic spread, I'm like 4 hours away, right?
Yeah.
So I'm with you on keeping kids where we want them to be while they engage with us in the process. And the one thing that we've done is we've started workshops on written testimony and how that can be such a big, support system and what we do for their voice to be heard without actually maybe having to be here. So happy to like join in that effort because I know, and I'm speaking for myself, but I think a lot of us look back and look at the written testimony, when they're in the packets and the different information that we get, that written testimony is just as valuable, for the decisions that we make. So keep that in mind too. But I love the voice of the youth because really, I mean, they're the future that we're trying to develop all of this for. If they're not there, we don't have the future that we need. So thank you. Are you going to stick around?
Yes, I will
Okay.
stick around. Thank you
Sounds
so
good.
much.
Thank you. We'll head over to Ashley Hightower from Hennepin County and then Terry Morrow will be next.
Right.
Welcome. If you want to do an introduction, who you're
Yeah.
with, and then you can start.
So my name's Ashley Hightower. I'm with Hennepin County Attorney's Office Be at School program, and we are the Educational Neglect and Truancy program for Hennepin County's K through 12 youth. So before I dive into my recommendations and considerations, I want to share with you some live truancy data. So to date, we have 1,902 students who have been reported to us. 321 of those students have been flagged as 15-day dropped or unenrolled. 98 of those students Be at School has been able to help confirm their enrollment. 119 of those students have been flagged as highly mobile or homeless. And overall, 746 students and families have been assigned to our community partners for voluntary services. It's only November, which means most of our students have only had about 50 days of school. This is real-time work for us, which makes my urgency and passion, that's where it's coming from for today. Because we know that these students that we work with have unique situations and barriers preventing them from attending school regularly. So with that being said, Be at School's recommendations come from a focus of preventative, supportive, and community-centered solutions, which require collaboration at the legislative level, administrative level, and then our local government levels. A key area of focus for us begins at the legislative level with the study group's bucket number 1, consistent definitions. We need to re-examine the state statutes that govern truancy and define responsibility based on age or define responses based on age. Our current statute tells us that a child's absence from school is presumed to be the caretaker's failure to comply if that student is 11 and under. But as soon as that student turns 12, the child's absence without a lawful excuse is presumed to be due to that child's intent to be absent from school. Why are we presuming that children 12 and older are purposely intending to miss school? We're ignoring the barriers these students are facing, and we're putting it based only on that child's age. They're having different consequences or services being offered to that student and family, again, based on their age. Our next area of recommendation is at the administrative level, bucket 4, increased data on attendance. We have to hold the administrative level at our state accountable to ensure students don't fall through the cracks. This only statutorial requirement for school staff is to send a 3-day letter notice to families. There's nothing in our statute to protect unenrolled students and their disappearance from our systems. I found that MDE has a public report. It's labeled compulsory instruction for for homeschooled students who are not in compliance with the Minnesota statute 120A.22. For the 23-24 school year, this report told me that 306 students from Anoka Hennepin district were not compliant, 97 from Osseo, 92 from Stillwater, and 52 from the Rosemont, Apple Valley, Egan District, who were not in compliant with the statute. Be It School is never notified of this for our affiliated districts. So my question is, where are these students? I keep hearing that it's a financial issue. Again, where are these students? And then where's the money going that's tied to them? Our next recommendation is for the administrative level, bucket 2, coordination among state and local agencies. Like Matt was saying, we need implement some real-time data systems. There's currently no system that's talking to each other about truancy or attendance or school. So for example, in a child protection report, we ask for the student's name, date of birth, housing information, parents' information. Why isn't it required to ask where the student's enrolled whenever they enter a system? They legally have to be enrolled. I think Representative Vernick kind of mentioned this a couple meetings back, referencing the broader needs assessment and if attendance was being asked. And I don't think so. We're not asking about enrollment. Our last recommendation today focuses on bucket 9, community support at the local government level. We must run campaigns to educate families about the importance of attendance and available resources. Public awareness campaigns are needed to build positive relationships with the community. I would say that relationships that have been broken by punitive, racially segregated, and they come from a place of criminalizing historical approaches that must be repaired. So in holding myself to 5 minutes, I'll end there, but I look forward to sharing the rest of our recommendations that you have from your buckets.
5 minutes. Thought you guys were gonna go for,
I could go on.
I know, no, I'm aware, I know. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Go ahead, Representative Lawrence.
Yeah,
Flip your switch. Yeah. New
All
room?
the-
Oh,
yeah, there we
new
go.
buttons, yeah, got it.
What, in your role from the Hennepin County, what barriers have we caused or from the state level are hinder you from performing the work you want to do? The things that you see that could really be effective, are there barriers that we have control of that could be alleviated to help?
Yeah, I would
Okay.
say the statutes are just really unclear. It's up to interpretation of that individual county. And then just separating families K through 12. We don't separate our reports. We keep it family focused. I really think it's hard for a 12-year-old to have that mindset of I'm going to miss school, but that's what our law is saying and putting them into that reference of intervention. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yes. Anybody else? I think one thing that we've talked a lot about is kind of that statute piece of it, is how they all overlap, where they overlap, which agency oversees what statute and how they talk to each other. And that's, I think, what Rhode Island has done so well is they've broken down all of those silos and like they're all actually talking to each other in real time, which is an IT thing, which we all know here, we're like way behind in a lot of IT stuff, kind of in general. But I think that's a good thing to look at, is the mechanism of how they talk to each other. And then the defining like lineups of the definitions will be nice too. Okay, great. Does anybody have anything else? No? Okay, you're gonna stick around for a while if anybody has any questions after. Okay, super. Thank you. We'll move over to the Minnesota School Boards Association. Roger Aronson will be next. Hello and welcome.
Hello, Chair Giller, members. My name is Terry Morrow. I'm the General Counsel and Director of Legal and Policy Services for the Minnesota School Boards Association. I'm also Chair of the Nicollet County Board of Commissioners, which will become relevant in a couple of minutes. Thank you for the invitation to join you today. MSBA represents all 331 school districts in the state. One of our functions, we create model policies for school districts to consider adopting. We do have a model policy on student attendance. I know I've been asked, for example, about definitions and the work to have consistent definitions. And I want to thank Matt Shaver from Ed Allies for our conversation this morning on that goal as well. As you know, the current law 120A.22 on excused absences allows districts to add reasons for excused absences to addition to those that are listed in the statute. Perhaps one of the most common distinctions among school districts is some allow family vacation to be an excused absence, some do not. If the legislature is interested in having a consistent definition, it will need to take a look at 128.22 and determine whether it wants to add certain categories such as family vacation, whether it wants to remove the reference to as other exceptions as determined by the school district. And before doing so, I would ask the legislature to give careful thought to whether local control of those decisions should be maintained. Should districts be able to determine what counts as an excused absence in their community? MSBA would be very happy to help with those, with the work on definitions on excused. Unexcused just tends to be what's not excused is unexcused. I will say that MSBA has worked with districts to try to work away from an academic punitive measure for unexcused absences, to try to break the tie between unexcused absence, which Chair Carolyn, I think Ms. Hightower, you also mentioned, absence is not necessarily the responsibility or the fault, if you will, of the student, and yet an academic penalty is imposed. Educational neglect, we would ask, would also be part of that definitional work. I'm going to turn for a moment to your point number 5 on data sharing. MSBA has considerable expertise when it comes to data sharing and the operations of both federal and state law when it comes to the information that school districts can share with county government and others. I would agree with Ms. Hightower, that law needs to be clarified. It is not always clear when a school district can provide information to county officials and vice versa. And we would hope to be able to be more clear on that so information can be expedited. I'm going to turn to my role as county commissioner. In Nicollet County, we've spent considerable time working with our school districts, embedding county employees within the school districts to work with families and work with students to increase their attendance. And I want to thank Matt Shaver again for noting that the St. Peter School District is one of the best performing when it comes to attendance in the state among students. Why is that? Well, a few things. One, Nicollet County has a diversion program established by our county attorney to move away from a model in which punishment is simply imposed and works with our county officials, with families, and with school officials on ways to help students overcome the obstacles that are impeding their attendance. We have a program that's called Collaborative Approach to Addressing Truancy, which again marshals resources to help students rather than simply focusing on ways in which statutory punishment can be imposed. We've brought together a group called Stakeholders for Education Success. Again, bringing together people in the community who work most closely with our youth to do everything that we can to ensure that they're in schools. And we also have a truancy court option, which again is diversion focused rather than penalty focused. Madam Chair, I've spoken both as general counsel and ways in which MSBA can step forward and be of assistance. Happy to answer questions on both that opportunity and my role with the Nicollet County Board of Commissioners.
Questions for members? Representative Lawrence?
Mr. Morrow, a couple of questions for you. Do we have, you mentioned that you have a policy that's recommended to school boards. Do we have a copy? I don't know if I've missed it. Do we have a copy of that in our hands as of yet?
If you don't, I
Could
would
we
be
get
happy
that?
to share that model policy 503 with your staff, and that could be distributed. Happy to share it.
Yep, please do that.
That would be great.
The second question I have is, you mentioned that your county, as a county commissioner, your county works very closely with the school districts providing personnel. Who funds that? Is the school district responsible for it, or does the county fund that?
We are primarily funding that through county funds.
Okay.
There is a partnership with the district, but it's primarily through us. In fact, we added just another position because of the deep need, both with the St. Peter district and with the Mankato district, which I know is one of your pilot programs.
Thank you.
Senator Swiderski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you mentioned family vacations.
Mhm.
And that some districts allow them as excused and some don't. Do you know off the top of your head, out of the 331 school districts, how many or what those, are there a handful? Are there the majority?
I would not say it's a majority, Senator. I don't have a firm number, but anecdotally, I would say roughly half, it feels like, when I look at their individual policies, because again, they take our model policies and then they can amend them. And the legislature has specifically offered to school districts, they can make more exceptions. So districts may be making great use of that. What I will also say, Senator, is that even if a district allows a family vacation as an excused absence, it may have conditions on that. So for example, in some districts, it's excused if the family and the student work with their teachers to have work to do during the vacation, or maybe if it's an educational opportunity, maybe the family's traveling somewhere that the student can engage in educational opportunities at the site they're going to. So districts differ on how they treat the family vacation if they allow it as excused. Many of the districts that allow family vacation to be excused try to add an educational component to that.
Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know this is a Herculean task, but 40 years ago when I first started teaching, God, a family, like once every 3 years, they would come to me and they'd go, my God, we've got this, Jimmy's grandmother is dying and we need to, it was rare. And it seems like in recent years, it's become the norm for a family just to assume it's okay to take their kid out of school for a week. And I don't know what caused that shift in mentality. That I have some ideas, but I'd really like to take this on this session and try to, among all the other tasks of this committee, and try to figure out if this is something we do want to allow or not allow, or strongly discourage it, because things happen, families in lives, but that it's become so normal for Jimmy to miss a week of school. I don't know what brought that on, but certainly I'll be looking to you guys this session to help us figure this out. So thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator, we'd be very happy to work with you on that. I just want to come back to the general point of, if this group wishes to have uniform definitions, then it will be taking away some of the local control that some districts say this counts as an absence and some districts say that does not count as an absence. I leave that to you. I'm not offering an opinion one way or the other. We're happy to help you all in any way we can.
I know we have 2 questions online too. Did you have anything you want to go? And then we'll move online.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This may have already obviously been talked about in one of the previous meetings, but just so I'm understanding this, there's been discussion about data sharing between school districts and county attorney's offices. And when I'm looking at the report here, it says that existing law allows a district to refer a truant student to a county attorney's office under 268.07. But then under the potential statutory change to chapter 13 part, it says that our statutes don't clearly authorize robust data sharing. What data do you think it isn't expressly authorized, or you think might be ambiguous, that would be helpful to share? What kind of data are we talking about?
My first response, Senator, would be to call on Ms. Hightower, because she knows much more, I think, about the intricacies of this than I. So please feel free to correct me if I get something wrong. Under the statute you just cited, 268.07, this is a report to the county attorney. Yet we have many people working in our Health and Human Services department in the county, and those conversations between the folks who are working in child protection, the folks who are working with family health concerns, the folks in our county who are working on the mental health side might not necessarily have that same conversation with the school district that the county attorney might potentially have. And again, I would defer to Ms. Hightower. You may know more about the information sharing that's permitted.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it may not be an issue specifically regarding truancy between the school district and the county attorney's office, but if maybe for additional services or that kind of thing, the statute isn't really clear on what the county attorney's office can share with other parts of the county. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's part of it. I'm also focused a little bit more on what does the school district have? What does the school nurse know? And can that information then be shared with the folks in the county who are working on mental health and other issues? One thing to keep in mind, Senator, is that under FERPA and under the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, for much of what's called the education record, the information we have on a specific student can be shared with parent consent. But if absent parent consent, there are a limited number of exceptions that would still allow a school to take information out of the education record, which would include health and everything else, and communicate that information to an individual, say at the county. And it's that limitation when we don't have parental consent, we're looking at a narrow set of options and either trying to fit it in there so we could share it or not share it because we're concerned about the potential liability.
Senator? Okay, we'll move online. Representative Bakeberg?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. Just a couple comments and then a question for Mr. Merrill. So I think we just need to be very clear when we're talking about definitions, at least when I am, I do not want us to get into micromanaging what is the local school district determining what's an excused and what's an unexcused absence. Like that's, I feel very strongly that's not the role of the legislature to do that, because the needs of one community are very, very different than the needs and what happens in another community. So a one size fits all approach is not the solution. But I think where the consistent definitions have come in is, especially in working with a county, and a county has multiple school districts, how we are reporting what is an excused and unexcused absence. That's where the data can get difficult to interpret accurately. So if that kind of gives MSBA some into my mindset, at least a little bit with that. So I don't think we should be doing a statewide piece, but putting some teeth to local counties so that we're consistent, I think is an important piece. You know, and really the family going on a week-long vacation or those pieces, I think we also have to recognize that schools have changed. So we'll have families that will go on vacation and kids will do work virtually, or they'll do things to be able to stay up on things or up onto what they're doing in school. And they're doing some really cool learning experiences. It might be at the beach, let's be honest, but they're doing some really neat learning experiences as well. So just that schools are adapting to just where we're at. But the bigger concern, and this is my question probably, and for Ms. Hightower or for Mr. Merrill, my concern as a building principal isn't the week-long absence. It isn't the kid, you know, that's sick here or there. It's the kids that we've gone through all of the steps. We've gone through all of the diversion that we have in place, and it's still not working. Those are the kids that we're really concerned about. Those are the kids that get to that 15-day drop rule and they disappear. Those are the kids that I'm concerned about. And that's what we really have to be looking at, from my opinion. So Mr. Merrill or Ms. Hightower, if you want to say now or, you know, at the end when we're all done, things that you've seen at your different counties, you know, I'd be willing to listen now or at the end.
Go ahead while you're here.
Well, thank you. And I'll just briefly remark that at the Nicollet County level, that was one of our concerns, especially during the pandemic and post-pandemic, was essentially finding students, relocating students, and keeping contact with students and families. And it did take the dedication of additional resources, additional funding, additional staff in order to do that work well.
Ms. Hightower, did you want to add anything? I know you've been mentioned many times as the expert in this. Did you want to go up and add any?
In my opinion.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So I would just say that the information, the county doesn't receive the information right until the school sends it. So we can't begin our work until the school makes the report. That can be at 20 days, 40 days, that could be the 15-day drop. But we can't start until that has been made. And then for the kids that have been, you know, we've gone through all of our program, the school's done what they can. I think we do have a really big issue at every level for those kids. We have programs that we can try and implement, but with funding, you know, what good does it do to work with a family for 60 days, 90 days? We're providing these Band-Aids. We don't have long-term solutions for our older students. Yeah, and that's just kind of our truth right now in Minnesota, unfortunately.
Mhm. I know we have Senator Farnsworth online trying to ask questions too, so we'll move to Senator Farnsworth. Thank you. You want to just hang up there in case? Yeah. Senator Farnsworth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my questions are about the county process. So the testifier mentioned that they have kind of a robust program to address truancy, and it sounds like it's moderately successful. So two-part question. One, do you happen to know approximately before and after data before the program started versus now, how truancy has improved? And then the second part of that would be just the specific strategies that the county is using that have been proven to be successful.
Certainly, first on the data, I do not have that data with me. I'd be certainly happy to share that data, and I'll send it to Mr. Negro and get you the information to share it. In terms of specific strategies, things that we do is focus with the schools on engagement, having clear policies, using trauma-informed lens when assessing absences, help create an attendance plan and more, and then working with medical professionals and healthcare professionals, both within the county and in private practice. We do such things as evaluating and diagnosing and asking them to share their diagnoses with us so that we know how to create a plan within the schools and through county staff to best support the student and the students' families. We recommend and or provide individual and family therapy through the county to address health and other issues that may be impeding student attendance. And again, I'd be happy to share this information with the study group.
Yeah, I would just like to add that I don't think we have a way to measure success in truancy at the state level and even at the school level. I'm not sure if it's asked on those big questionnaires that students take yearly. So we're not really measuring it. It would be county by county and what you determine is successful. So I think that question could be answered multiple different ways. And then as far as strategies being used at Hennepin County, obviously we have our traditional method where students can be assigned to a case manager for case management, but we're also opening the doors earlier. We're allowing family referrals so families can start working with us before they're at that habitual truancy marker. We're also working with individual schools and school districts to start some early interventions right on site, right at the school. But that is government funded. That's coming from Hennepin.
Senator Farnsworth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And actually, that statement actually, I think was kind of profound, and it sort of supports what Representative Bakeberg said as far as not necessarily wanting to micromanage the school districts or the counties. But when she said, Ms. Hightower, I think is your name, right?
Yeah.
Said you could get a different answer for, you know, every different county. And I think one of the things that I've learned through this process is that all of the different regions have different issues. I mean, I learned early on about how Native American kids go ricing, and so they're missing school because they're ricing. That isn't a problem in my school district, but for the last week and a half, we've had an awful lot of kids that have missed to go deer hunting. And so I think that this committee can come up with an awful lot of good ideas, but I would be hesitant to say that we need a one size fits all. This is what you have to do to address truancy. I think we need to allow flexibility because all of these counties and school districts are so different. And so I really thought that was an important statement. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Anybody else with any questions? Okay. I will say, when we leaned into the School Boards Association with the idea of model policy, to me, it's meaning that we're not creating mandates for schools, right? We're allowing schools then to look at what you suggest. I think when we were talking over the time frame is we would take the information that, because all the pilot study groups right now are looking at attendance definitions. And it's not maybe necessarily the definition word for word, but it's like the time parameter. Like, what is tardy? Like, is tardy 4 hours later? Is tardy within the first half hour of school starting, right? So that at least when we're sending MDE all the information, we're at least within the same parameters. Okay. Getting into the weeds about family vacations, I would agree, is not at all where we're at. I mean, like, if we can verify some of that stuff and it's good and it's checked off, it's not wasting as much time for the people who need to be doing the critical work that we know are so understaffed to do these bigger areas. And so I think, again, the recommendations are just the areas that we know we probably want to have more robust conversation in session about, but I appreciate your willingness to lean in with us to look at some of the suggestions in model policy. Also very much partnering with the pilot group that's coming back to give us some feedback in a couple weeks. So yeah, I just want to make sure that we all know, like, putting these firm definitions is not, I think, what we're trying to do. We're trying to give parameters more for consistency of reporting. So when we pull a statewide report, we know when you're saying you're truant by tardies, it's that you're getting to school a half hour late, not like every school's so different. And then also the area that we were trying to define is as simple as when we say elementary is K through 5. When we say middle school, it's 6 through 8. When we say high school, it's 9 through 12. No matter how you're set up in your district and your community is, but that we're getting that information back. So we can have more robust conversation. But again, this was just to give some high level information based off what the pilot's doing so that we're not doing any more mandates to school. So you're like the happy medium that we're all trying to find here.
Perfect.
Cool.
Thank you.
Okay. And then I kind of want to go and just talk about the data privacy sharing piece. We've talked a lot about it. And what we've kind of come up with is, like, we need to ask both sides, what is the information you're not able to get? Because everybody keeps saying, oh, FERPA's preventing us from do this, or like the county can't give the information here, but we haven't really been able to pare down what are the specifics that we're asking. So the hope is maybe this session we can dig into, like, what can we share? What are we not sharing? And what is it actually that we need? And in which direction do we need it? Right? Because there's school sending to county is one way, county sending back to schools is another. Part of it is we can't even see the notes. So like if we're typing in notes as a liaison that's done truancy work, and I know the family's 4-year history, and then it goes over to county, right? And now it's working with a CPS worker, they can't see any of those notes. And so I think the point is that we want to dig into how y'all work better together. And if there's firm policy barriers within the state that we need to address in that capacity so we can talk to each other, so we can have more real life data if needed. Do we feel like we've kind of clarified, I guess, where we are with model policy efforts? Great. So then you'll be tuning in when they come back to do the pilot presentation?
Yes.
With all the language. Okay, great. Does anybody have anything else on this? That was a great conversation. We have time. You have somebody? No. Okay, what do we have next? Now I've lost track in my, Roger Aronson is on Zoom. Go ahead, Roger.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. My name is Roger Aronson. I represent the Elementary School Principals Association, the Secondary School Principals Association, and today I'm speaking on behalf of the MASA, the School Administrators Association, and then AMSD as well. And we appreciate the work of the committee and, frankly, the way that you've put this together in the various sections. I might say very typical for us to get 2 to 3 minutes. When you give us 10, it makes it very problematic to try to think of stuff to talk about for 10 minutes, but I'll do my best to fill that time that you've given us.
And we're all legislators. We could.
There you
provide
go. Absolutely. I want to say at the outset, and you worked pretty hard on this with the last two testifiers. I think that your charge and what you were working on was not to redo local attendance policies.
Right.
Representative Ben Bakeberg is talking basically about traditional stuff in schools where one attendance policy works in one district. There might be something very specific about it, and it might not work in another district at all. And frankly, the legal advice that we continue to give people is if you have something that works, keep using it. If it doesn't work, change it and get something else. Terry Morrow told you something very important about we strongly say, hey, don't impose academic penalties for kids that are in truancy violations or unexcused absence violations. One of the things, and this is very interesting, and Senator Swadzinski brought this up, there is a change. Parents think that they are entitled to excuse their kids from coming to school, where technically the statute actually says that they make application to the school to have their kids excused for all or part of the term. But there has been that culture shift, that it looks like that it's parents that's doing that. I don't know if it's necessary to change that, but it's been a very, very specific change that's happened. I want to just make one little reference when you talk about doing the language. Some years ago, we added that phrase continuing truant, and that's a student that's gone for 3 days. And the statute triggers some notices that we send to the parents that are rather, I want to say, inflammatory almost, that says your kid may very well be a truant, and they are not kids that are going to truancy. You might look at that and say, we don't need to call that truant anymore. It's actually, I think, misleads a lot of people on that. The notices to the parents to say, hey, you need some attention to this. We need some intervention here. We moved that statute out of the education code some years ago, and put it over in the truancy statute. But I think you might take a look at that and say that particular language and characterization is not helping us on the definition piece. A couple things that I want to draw to your attention on the time here. When you first set this committee up, and the question was, when you talk about community engagement, the executive directors of the Secondary Association had the opinion that we ought to examine a lot of things that kids can do outside of school that we would give them credit for, and various programs, and that we need to interest students in coming to school, that some of that is on us to make this someplace that they want to be. As we talk about this issue here, we always have the problem with the graduation requirements. And so what, do they need to take in order to graduate? Do they have more time in their day? Can we look at that to say some of these kids should have some alternatives to those traditional requirements and try to work in what you're talking about here? And I wouldn't say just limiting it with the Council on Indian Affairs, but that for other groups as well, as to what we might do for those kids. We think that's kind of an important part to go. On the data piece, I would tell you that as counsel for the elementary and secondary principals associations, I get routine questions about what data can we share with whom? What can we give to the county? What can we give to the police? What can we give to third parties that are requesting this? Things that we do to clarify that, so there's no question at all about sharing data and making that easier with the counties. All of that is that's a valuable enterprise. It's something that we ought to do. It looks to us like you're talking about the department taking that data that we send them, clarifying that more, disaggregating it to a certain extent, and allowing it to be useful to the counties when they're working on that. We think that's a very, very good idea to go that way. It didn't look like it was, you were telling us that we should be providing more data. We provide a substantial amount of data to the department already on attendance. I want to make one comment, and this obviously the transportation piece caught our attention. Adding transportation costs are obviously something that all school districts are always concerned about. A little trivia piece here, and it's interesting to see it show up in your report. We had a coach that was given a ticket some years ago for driving students to a regional tournament. And he had the kids in his own car, but he didn't have the appropriate the classification license, and so he got a ticket. And we actually had that statute fixed so that coaches could drive kids to events, and from time to time, principals could take kids home, where it says it's unscheduled transportation. That was a unique little fix that we were able to tug in there to take care of that. Those types of transportation pieces are things that we could look at probably with, because sometimes, and we talk about this, where the principals make home visits. Obviously, the county makes home visits. And some of those types of things might give us a bit of flexibility, relative to having students in a car. But the transportation piece is obviously of a real significant issue to us. We appreciate talking about these issues a lot. I mean, we think this is very, very important. As we go through this, we need to get kids to school, and we're interested in working on that, particularly with our kids that aren't here. I think a thing that's always important when you get principals together to talk about, it's hard to direct resources to these kids sometimes that are truant. I mean, they need advocates like this committee to come forward and say, hey, we're going to spend the money to do this, on these particular kids at this time. We think that's a very worthwhile enterprise. And so we appreciate working with you in the future as this moves into the session. Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have too.
Thank you so much. Any members have questions? Online, do we have anybody? Sorry. I think I think the transportation piece, were you gonna ask a question? Okay, you were looking like you had a question, Sue. Okay. I think the transportation piece has been really interesting. The more that we dig into it and the different statutes on who can transport, when they can transport, but also like, I think it's clear we're having a hard time getting bus drivers, and I think bus drivers are just, it's so much, and there's these different classifications that really we could have like a fleet. And I talk a lot about, we were able under some insurance as a liaison to go pick up students who were identified as chronically absent and bring them to school, and it was super helpful. And so I think what we're trying to look for is not only like the busing distance, that's one of the things that we have an issue with, but like, we don't need a bus to go out and pick up 2 more kids. Like, we need to have this other lane that like you can have a personal relationship, because the reason that you're not going to school most likely there's something else going on that we need to engage with. So I'm glad that the transportation piece has come up, and that there's plenty of statutes for us to look at around, because if what did you say, who right now is able to transport a principal?
Madam Chair, it's unscheduled transportation. That's the key there, so that a coach could take kids to an event, principal could take a kid home, those pieces, yes.
I mean, are principals taking kids home at the end of the day? Like, I feel like I've worked in schools and my principals are usually pretty busy. It's usually like support staff or other, like, it would be our social workers or liaisons, right? That would be doing this. Like, am I mistaken? Is that something that principals are doing at the end of the day? Bakeberg, are you taking your kids home at the end of the day?
There are times that I have, or like this year I went out and picked the kid up. He was refusing to leave his house. So I went out and got him, and he got in my truck and we drove home, or drove back to school. So it's rare. If like my social worker or a counselor, they'll usually take the school vehicle, like one of the school cars, and they'll drive out, try to get the kid in the car, and then come. We've got a phenomenal relationship with our transportation company. So we'll honestly go out oftentimes, I'll go and then he'll go with the school, or with one of his type 3 vehicles, and the kid will get in the car and then we'll go. So that unscheduled piece is an important piece.
Thanks. Does anybody have anything else for that? My brain can go pretty deep into that conversation. We'll pause on that.
But I think one thing I would add too, sorry, there's a lot of schools will just have a principal, or they won't have multiple layers of support. So it'll be a principal and maybe a social worker, and one of them will go out, or a principal and a teacher on special assignment. So talking with many of my colleagues, that's the structure of their building.
Okay. Thank you. We have one left, right? Jessica Heiser? Yay, okay. Thanks for coming. You want to introduce yourself before you begin?
Thank you for hanging out to the end. I appreciate it. Chair Wheeler and members of the committee, my name is Jessica Heiser. Thanks for the opportunity to testify. I am a former teacher, and I have been an education attorney for 12 years, representing both school districts and families in 3 different states. I actually think I'm the reason why you have a Indiana code in your section 3 of your preliminary report.
Yes.
I lead the special education team at Minnesota Disability Law Center, which is part of Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid. MDLC is the federally designated protection and advocacy agency for people with disabilities around the state of Minnesota. So our clients come from every county and receive our legal services for free without income eligibility requirements. You have seen in the data and the testimony over the last few months that students with medical conditions and disabilities are far more likely to be chronically absent from school than non-disabled students. There is no single group of students that is more likely to be chronically absent from school than students with disabilities. And those numbers are only worse for disabled students of color and low means. Unfortunately, the preliminary report does not adequately address that issue. One of our clients, Leah, was just called to our office in the last couple of weeks. Leah is a 16-year-old twice exceptional student. Since 3rd grade, she has been open enrolled in a school district about 10 minutes away from her house. And she stayed at that school district from 3rd to 11th grade, making friends and excelling at school. She is in the gifted program. She is a national merit scholar. And she also has diagnoses of anxiety, depression, and autism. During her 11th grade year, she had an increase in those depressive symptoms. She tried a new medication. They tried coming to school for just very specific classes, but nothing really seemed to work. And she ended up missing 5 weeks of school cumulatively. Her mother was in constant communication with the school, emphasizing that her depression and anxiety were causing her absences. And the school social worker did reach out to the family a couple of times, but nobody at the school thought to address these absences from a special education lens. In fact, Leah was told by her assistant principal, you need to get your act together or you will get kicked out. And that is exactly what happened. At the end of Leah's 11th grade year, her school district sent her a letter saying that her open enrollment had been terminated due to chronic absenteeism and she needed to go back to her district of residence for her 12th grade year. In essence, because of her depression, Leah would now have to finish her senior year in a completely foreign school to her. She had no friends there. She didn't know any teachers there. She had never set foot in that school building. And of course, her depression and anxiety were only exacerbated by those circumstances. So by the time Leah's parent called MDLC, we had a national merit scholar who was threatening to drop out of high school rather than to be forced to attend senior year at an unknown school with no friends. But unfortunately for us, Leah's story is not all that unique. Our clients commonly contact MDLC after their school district has threatened truancy proceedings or revoked a student's open enrollment status due to chronic absenteeism. You've heard testimony today about how these letters and these threats that come through help nobody, but they're one of the few tools that school districts have available to them. Sometimes parents have kept their kids at home because the school hasn't provided special education services as promised, which makes that environment unsafe. For example, sometimes a school will promise a nonverbal child a one-on-one paraprofessional, but they just don't have the staff to fulfill that role. And so parents will keep their kids home from school until the paraprofessional can be hired. But then they face the punitive truancy proceedings when their child's absences climb. When schools fail to recognize that connection between absenteeism and disability, and only able to turn to truancy as punishment instead of addressing absenteeism through the special education process, nobody wins. And because of that, MDLC is addressing the report in a way that we hope will concretely address that link between absenteeism and disability in 3 ways. First, Section 6 encourages school staff dedicated to truancy reduction. We're highly encouraged of that. However, that section does need a focus on coordination between special education staff and attendance administrators, and more training for approaching truancy with an anti-ableist lens, recognizing the frequency of chronic health conditions and disabilities that lead to absenteeism. Second, we're also highly encouraged with Section 8, which supports the encouragement of behavioral health grants and comprehensive mental health services. And third, MDLC would suggest adding some sort of defense to truancy proceedings, wherein parents are not subject to truancy charges and children are not subject to revocation of open enrollment status when MDE special education complaints find that the school was the one that violated federal disability law. So this gives schools an incentive to examine their obligations under the disability laws and ensure students with chronic health conditions have been fully supported before turning to punitive measures. MDLC has drafted language on truancy defense, and we hope it will be considered in the 2025 session. I'm happy to answer any other questions as well.
Almost forgot my switch. Anybody have any member questions? Anybody online? I want to say thank you for being an advocate for the mental health piece of this. I'm in another lane that I'm working on. I'm working on psychiatric residential treatment facilities in greater Minnesota because we obviously need that. Our schools say that they need that partnership very deeply. I've worked with a population of students who have gone home and have come back the next day and students have taken their own life. So I know deeply how important it is for us to realize it's real when students are saying that they are having crisis and they need help, and forcing them to be in school is not the place to be. So my questions are leaning into IEP, special education policy there. Is the language there, and I admit I haven't really probably dug into it as much, but is it more leaning into like the physical parts of needing supports in schools versus the mental health part of needing supports in schools? Is there statute that we have to address to add the lane of mental health supports in IEPs? Because we do a lot when there's physical abilities that we need to be able to help and support. What's your feedback or honest opinion on that?
Well, first of all, thank you, Madam Chair, for the work that you're doing. The IEP language and the legal language does really pretty adequately address both physical and mental disabilities. So there's not really a division or different lanes there. There has been a lot of case law around the idea of chronic absenteeism not being addressed through special education is a violation of the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, but it's almost never codified into state law. It's simply jurisdictional based on what certain judges in certain jurisdictions do. So it's a fairly consistent nationwide when it comes to when this comes in front of an administrative law judge, they see that connection, but it's very rarely ever addressed in state law.
Yeah, Senator Farnsworth, I was going to ask if he's works in special ed. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have to admit, so I work in the special ed department. I do special ed evaluations. And I have to admit that testimony like this sort of gets me like, hey, wait a minute. And the reason for that is I don't think there's any school in Minnesota that's sitting there, like a villain trying to think, how can we not help kids? And the story that was told, I've heard similar stories like that in my own district, but then you also hear stories like, parents that requested testing for their kids, and you interview the kids, you're like, hey, how come you didn't get your homework done this weekend? Oh, well, we were at the casino and we were in the hotel room at the casino all weekend. And so I think that we have to acknowledge that, and Bakeberg probably could shed some light on this. We have to acknowledge school. We're trying to help kids. And for every story where there's an injustice towards a student, there's also a story where the school is trying to weed through the truth where a parent's like, yeah, my kid's struggling, they're failing, and we're doing everything we can. And then we discover, well, no, you're not. You're taking them out of school to go swimming, at the water park and then not getting homework done. And I don't know what the answer is, but I just want to sort of defend schools and say, I think schools are really trying to do what they can to help kids. And I mean, it's been my career for over 20 years working with kids with disabilities. And so I don't want to leave this and just say, yes, schools are terrible. They're not trying to help kids. Schools really are trying to help, but it's a difficult needle to thread to figure out, what the right ground is on this. So I don't really have any questions, but I just sort of feel like I want to defend education because there's no teacher, there's no school that's trying to figure out a way to keep a kid out of special ed or trying to think of a way to not help kids. We all want to help kids. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have a question for you, Senator. When you're doing IEPs with families, is transportation is that one of the conversations in some of that first setup? Like, are we having initial conversations when we're setting up an IEP about transportation needs with students? Is that a pretty common first conversation that we're having?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I haven't actually been a real teacher for about 15 years. I've been doing evaluations, so I haven't written an IEP, but back when I was still writing IEPs, yeah, we had to address every year in the IEP, we had to address transportation. And each year I had a couple of students that were on special transportation for one reason or another. Because I was an EBD teacher, it was usually behavior where it was unsafe for them to be on the regular bus. But that is something that is addressed. And I think that's where it gets kind of, again, this is a tricky area because the items in the IEP have to come out of the disability. So for instance, if a student has an emotional behavior disorder, then you have to provide services that are directly relevant to that disability. And so the behavior might be directly relevant to needing special transportation. But say the parent's car broke down, that isn't necessarily not necessarily, that's not the result of the disability. So we wouldn't provide special transportation because the parent's car broke down. So transportation has to be pretty specific to, unless the advocate has case law that I'm unaware of. My understanding is it's got to be specific to the disability.
Okay.
I agree. Go ahead. Senator Farns was accurate. So special transportation is always addressed in the IEP process, but his point is accurate. It has to be related to the student's receipt of free appropriate public education. It can't be related to convenience or family concerns or just a lot of times parents will ask because of scheduling that they need special transportation, and it really has to be tied directly to the disability.
Okay,
Yeah.
so like if anxiety was the disability and riding on a school bus was like the anxiety driver, are those
That would
some
be
of the
that,
things
yes.
then? But if we're just having, okay,
Yeah, that would be an adequate connection.
okay, thank you. Does anybody else have anything regarding this? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on the, you mentioned case law kind of already establishes how the school can't, has limitations on what they can do with special education students, but that state law doesn't codify it. What about federal law? The case law you're referencing, is that interpretation of federal law primarily, or is it interpretation of state law? And would your concern be better addressed at Congress or this state legislature?
Oh, go ahead.
It's a great question. So yes, Senator, most of disability law is done under federal law. I would say 90% of what is addressed through an IEP is generally done under the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. Minnesota is unique. I am new to Minnesota, and Minnesota is unique in that your state law actually does provide enhanced protections from federal disability law. And this could be certainly an area in which those enhanced protections are included.
Do you have any more questions? We got time if you have more questions about it.
Without having done more legal research on it,
Okay. The special education piece is really complex when you overlap federal. I mean, we learned that just when we tried to do the paperwork piece of it. I mean, that was the number one thing we heard was like teachers in special education and the time it takes to fill out the robust amount of paperwork that they have. And then we dug into it and like, I think 90% or something of the paperwork is a federal regulation we can't even change in the state. And so it gets to be really complicated, but I have a feeling you'll be around this session for us to lean into. If we need more questions, and I do think case law and what we can do here is really important because special education and IEPs are so legally binding to provide the services and supports for kids to go to school. And I think the piece about a student leaving a school because they weren't getting the services they needed to transition to a new school. We know that when you transition and you move, you lose months of education too. So it's not maybe the best move, but it was really insightful. Thank you. Does anybody have anything else on this? No. Okay. I think we have one public testifier, right? Rick Heller, did you have something? Please introduce yourself and then start for the record.
All members of the Students Attendance and Truancy Legislation Study Group on November 18th. My name is Rick Heller, unofficially represent the twice exceptional Minnesota Statute 120B15, or perhaps Senate File 2023-2024 3299. Twice exceptional for the record are people that not only found with a gift and talent, but also have a disc on their disability. Anywhere from 5 to 10% of the population, based on the National Education Association, are those individuals that perhaps go under the radar. I also unofficially represent the print disability. Last year, the governor changed the word handicap to print disability. I believe you find that in 2023-2024, House File 5222. These are individuals that have difficulty with reading. In fact, the U.S. Congress approved the Marish Treaty in 2018 after working on it for 5 years. And then Library of Congress Services decided to merge those words and call them eligible individuals. Once again, we have currently 2 definitions in the statute that probably affect a large amount of twice exceptional and print disabled, or should I call them single groups? However you want to work it. I have some strong suggestions that you move forward with here. The total special education system manuals was a 10,000-foot view for school districts to apply and coordinate interventions. I would challenge the State Department of Education. Have they changed the word handicap to print disability and require school districts embed that in the process as they integrate services with counties? Very relevant, plugging this in about individuals. Another thing you might want to consider is functional behavior assessments are typically done in special ed, but not always. But one thing, they are considered assistive technology, but never an functional technology assessment. However, the blind got that covered well. You might consider some of these elements for this piece. Also now specifically on this document, first of all, thanks to the LCC, the Legislative Coordinating Commission, with their help expressed in the document, does not need plain language law. Plain language is about text complexity, but also like using abbreviations. Another one, for instance, when you highlight a document, how does it meet accessibility? Last month, the legislature was required to file digital accessibility. In fact, school districts required, thanks to U.S. Attorney General Garland, implementing web content accessibility guidelines and Section 508, depending on how many employees they have, to apply this. Just who's all on the same page here on digital accessibility? Including your own report, LCC, obviously, thanks to their hard work to work on accessibility. These are important things. I do appreciate you waiving your rule here, not being able to testify on Friday. It's like appointment. I don't find it respectful, but I do find it respectful that you allow on the fly the people to come down and testify, because that's how it used to be. And this is not a place to go see a doctor or a dentist that you need an appointment. But when there's time and space to do that, and also providing 10 minutes of time is very relevant to people that have difficulty with expressing some words, even those that are related to print-related disabilities. As you know, in 2015, perhaps, the legislature required the Minnesota Department of Education to set the text complexity or language of the special education forms. I waited 3 or 4 years before I did my data request. On their page, you'll find the word reading disability. However, it was a teachers union, and the record holds that said they didn't understand the special education form because of the complexity as you expressed today, Chair. So did not mention what text complexity they set that on their main page, but did say the legislature expressed it. I think it needs to be corrected. I think it needs to say the teachers were involved. I just provided some testimony. It became law. They wanted me to review their own documents for accessibility. I says, I'm not the person. I just brought it over to Senate. It became law. Frankly, we need to take a serious look at plain language, because they set it at 8th grade Lexile. Lexile is based on an independent reading level when the kids take the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment. A Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment is a summative assessment you can go and do independently. They get an independent Lexile number. Just for your information, again, 8th grade with the University of Minnesota, they decided to set the text complexity for those with reading disabilities, not print disabilities. And frankly, with the new merger, I'm urging the Minnesota Department of Education, without using any due process or data practice corrections, that they would just correct that. This message is specifically for them. So these are some of the important things as we provide a multi-sensory experience for everyone. You get to see it. That's silent read. Every kid will read well. That means silent by 3rd grade. You get to see it now. Your phones read out loud. English is second language. And you get to feel it, Braille. Just like the legislature, which they applied accessibility for last month, applies also to school districts. Now, when we got players here taking state dollars and federal dollars, and they already took federal dollars, they only have to do Section 508. They're required. Like, one question I would ask, what school district, since there are some superintendents and principals, post their total special education system manuals and make sure they're fully accessible, not only for the teachers to help understand this, maybe they want a flow chart, maybe they want a graphic, a chart, decision tree. This all helps the connection and parents not feeling isolated with a very complex situation. We need to simplify this in a way that more people can be connected and engaged with a very complicated process. I appreciate this opportunity to speak. I'm open to any further questions in the future. Again, thank you again.
Thank you. Any questions, members? Anybody online? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you. And one thing I would like to thank you is what we all choose to plug in. Thank you again.
Thanks. Oh my gosh, look at us wrapping up maybe a little bit early, right? So we'll just kind of go over what the next steps are, what the next plans are. Is there any other members of the public that wish to testify? No. Did you see my pause? I gave a pause just in case. I think we're good. Okay. So the next meeting that we have is going to be virtual. It's the December 2nd. It's the Monday that we'll be getting the report back from the pilot groups, right? No.
We won't have the report. The report is due December 31st.
We'll be doing it.
Online to share about their initiative.
Great. Yes, we're hearing from the pilot programs. All 11 schools are going to be, 12 schools will be participating. Okay, so that will be what we're doing online on Zoom. We do need a member of this committee to be in person in the Capitol. Is anybody who available to be in person that day. Would love to not be because I have to drive, but I can. Okay, and you can do it in your office. It just needs to be on, one of us needs to be on site. We'll work with Nick. Great. Thank you. And then the last meeting that we will have is December 16th. That is the one that we had originally thought would be all in person because we'll be finalizing all of our recommendations. The recommendations is literally just a report that goes back to the legislature to say what we did in hopes that we move forward with any policy areas. I think what we've done is we've broken down some significant areas that we think need work, and we've had some significant conversations about it for us to move forward. And we know one thing, who the stakeholders are. I think from the very beginning of this, the first thing we learned is that we don't even know who's working on attendance and what capacities and what areas they want to overlap. And so it feels like we did a whole lot of work to really just figure out who the players were. But I think that that was really key and really important. And so the last meeting that we have, we're strongly suggesting that we all come together as members of this committee, just to be sure to have a robust conversation as we finalize our recommendations and take a vote on what we want to submit in our final report. If you're not able to make it, hybrid is online. We will not be taking any public testimony at that point in time, but you're happy to be here if we need any questions or clarifying support. Does that sound good for everybody? And then we're done, right? After the 16th, and we don't come back. Until we're back to do the good work all collectively together to get kids in school and be successful in Minnesota. So go ahead, Senator Swazinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there a time on these two dates? Yeah.
Same as it's been every other Monday, 2:30 to 4:30. Nick will send out information on the location for the meeting on the 16th.
And I appreciate your attempts at wait time because whenever I was observed, that was always a weakness of mine.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to wait because I didn't have enough time in the day to get through the curriculum. So the wait time is one of my biggest challenges.
Yeah,
So
it's a-
I appreciate your attempts at that.
Thanks for acknowledging the attempts that I'm trying, right? Does anybody else have anything else before we leave? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.
Good.